Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, 2024. The excavation has gone smoothly these past 3 weeks, but today we've encountered something so strange that it warranted the creation of this entry you're presently hearing. As of this moment, I'm not sure whether or not to officially publish these finds, as I fear for the repercussions it may produce, and I do not wish to tarnish my professional legacy. The reason I'm even recording this story to begin with is to keep a personal record of these recent events while they're fresh in my mind. But I also intend to post it anonymously to the internet, where it would likely be swept away and disregarded as a hoax or urban legend. I'm fine with that. I just need to get it off my chest. I know it's not rational or even a good idea to share this with strangers, but I just need to tell someone. Maybe someone will know what is going on. Until I have fully decided on whether or not to publish, I will keep this as anonymous as I can. I'm a paleoanthropologist at an esteemed university in the States, and I've been leading a small excavation team here in Tanzania at one of the oldest sites of hominin occupation in the world, Olduvai Gorge. Our excavation site was located on the eastern stretches of the gorge, in a particularly hilly area. As scouted by our surveyors, they chose this spot due to the presence of a series of small and seemingly undiscovered rock shelters hidden behind thick shrubbery and debris. It is nothing short of a miracle that they were able to be located by our team. Over these past weeks, we have found here an abundance of lithic assemblages, most of them consisting of Oldowan scrapers and cores. But we also found a pair of Acheulean hand axes and a few bifacial points. Deep in one of the rock shelters, we even unearthed the partial remains of what is most likely an Australopithecine upper skull, though further osteological analysis is pending. All seemed to be going well until today, when my lunch break was interrupted by one of my students. I will refer to him as Edward. He came rushing over from the easternmost rock shelter, nearly stumbling over all the pebbles and sticks in his way as he hurried down the hill towards the tents, calling my name. I rose from my seat to greet him, fearing that some sort of accident had happened. "What is it?" I anxiously inquired. I'd never seen him this upset. "You gotta come check this out, right now," he replied enigmatically and ushered me to follow him. I went with him up the hill and into the mouth of the rock shelter. Immediately, I noticed what all the fuss was about. Deep in the innermost end of the rock shelter, past all the excavation tools and equipment, where there had previously been a solid rock wall, there was now a small opening. I saw this small hole next to this big rock, and I just kept digging and digging, and I moved some more rocks, and Oh, okay, you should have notified me sooner, I said, cutting him off as I ventured deeper into the shelter, toward the gaping hole. I feared that, in his eagerness, he may have disturbed an important context. But the thing is, I looked inside, with my light and whatnot, and I saw these, things. You better take a look. I crouched down beside the hole and searched my pockets for my flashlight. The opening seemed big enough for someone to crawl into, and as I turned on the light, the shining beam illuminated a massive cavern on the other side, probably big enough to stand in. "Remarkable," I uttered. "Shine your light at the far end walls. Do you see them?" Edward probed. I did as he had asked, and as my light moved across the dusty volcanic rock walls of the chamber, I laid my eyes on something that made my heart skip a beat. First believing it to be merely a trick of the light, I stuck my head deeper into the opening to get a better view. "You see them, don't you?" Edward's voice echoed behind me. Lost for words, I began crawling through the opening, eagerly disregarding any health and safety precautions one would be wise to employ when venturing into such undiscovered cave environments. I heard Edward calling out to me as I did so, begging me to be careful. I scraped up my arms and legs in the process, and as I emerged on the other side, I was completely covered in dust, which I promptly brushed off my rugged clothes as I stood up. On the far end wall were a series of rough carvings onto the rock. Carvings in the Latin alphabet. Carvings in English. The whole wall was full of them, as if it was a page in a book. Behind me, I heard Edward grunting and shuffling as he made his way through the opening to join me in my astonishment. I scanned the rest of the cavern with my light and saw that the inscriptions continued on the other surfaces and walls of the chamber. Not only that, but I noticed a series of strange artifacts scattered about, seemingly undisturbed for millennia. Among them were several aforementioned Oldowan stone tools, and a ring made of mostly pure gold, judging by its pristine condition, as well as some bones randomly strewn around. My immediate thoughts were that the cave must have been used in modern times, perhaps recently. I hadn't yet actually read the content of what was scribbled on the walls, but even still, something about that explanation immediately felt off. The strata next to where the opening had been was undisturbed and had naturally accumulated for millions of years. I should know because I monitored it closely yesterday when we started digging in that part of the rock shelter. I realize some of you hearing this might not be familiar with stratigraphy, and thus not fully understand why this would be an issue when regarding the date of the inscriptions. But those well acquainted with the law of superposition should know exactly why this shouldn't be possible. If you don't, I urge you to Google it. But to make a long story short, however, the law of superposition states that geological layers accumulate over time, and that under normal circumstances, the layers that are the oldest are those found further down. Now, assuming the entrance we came in is the only entrance into the cave, and taking into consideration the opening was buried under a dozen stratigraphical layers, it means that this was last sealed around 1 million years ago at the earliest. Everything about this was strikingly anachronistic, but I saw no other explanation. There seemed to be no other way to enter the cave, and there was no sign of a previous collapse. "What is this, Edward?" I asked him, who was now full of dirt and standing beside me. "Are you pulling my leg here? Is this some kind of elaborate joke?" "No, sir, I promise." "It shouldn't be possible then," I said, pacing back and forth. "Yet, evidently it is," he somewhat snarkily replied. I ignored him. My pacing took me around a slight bend in the cave, and I noticed a heap of what looked like different chunks of various materials. Some seemed to be nearly reduced to dust as a result of deterioration over time, while others looked pretty much to be in pristine condition, although not as shiny as they once probably were. There were also snake-like lines in the sandy floor of the cave, with traces of heavily oxidized copper encompassed within them. Had these ones been wires? If they were ever covered in plastic, as most wires today are, it must have broken down millennia ago, leaving no trace. Quite remarkable. "Doc, you should see what's written on these walls." Edward's voice echoed around the bend. "Just a second," I replied, carefully observing the strange assemblage and analyzing it as best as I could. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. Was this a machine? "Whoa, like you really need to come right now," Edward again urged me. I emerged from behind the bend to see what all the fuss was about. And when I did, I noticed the dusty visage of Edward looking pale as a ghost. "What's the matter?" I asked, looking at where the beam of his flashlight was illuminating the inscribed wall. "Read what it says," Edward urged me. And so I did. In the following section of this entry, I will recount word for word what was inscribed on those walls. Where there is significant erosion or other obstruction of the text, I have filled in the gaps. From what I interpreted to be the beginning, the upper left corner, it reads as follows. "Upon arrival, the machine broke down almost instantaneously. I am the only living Homo sapien in the world, and there won't be another like me for at least 2 million years. There is an overwhelming hopelessness to it all. There is no hope for me. I have accepted it. These things, these devils, have left me no other choice than to seal myself into this tomb. I can hear them at night, digging and scratching. Thus read the first section of the text. Beneath it, the next one read, "My name is Bill Hartnell, and I was born on the 29th of September in Exeter, England, and this is my full story. I'm stuck in here for the foreseeable future, so I might as well tell my tale in as much detail as I can. I've got nothing better to do to pass my remaining time. Apologies if I don't get to finish it. Writing on this wall is somewhat tedious, however, so I will be concise. Forgive me. I studied quantum mechanics at Exxon and graduated with my PhD in 2058. The machine I built subsequently took me 10 years to complete and was operational by 2068, which is also the year I traveled here. I have now been here for a total of 2 weeks, and fear this may be my last. If you find this message, Patricia, you were both right and wrong. Right in that it would end badly, but wrong in that it wouldn't at least work." The writing ceased as this wall had met with the ground, but it continued on another, larger register to its upper right. My goal was to travel through time and witness every significant human benchmark in chronological order, starting here with the earliest use of tools, and ending my tour with the 2029 Mars landing launch. But now, it seems the beginning of the human story will be the end of mine. There is something else here, something that doesn't belong. One moment, I was in my garage in Exeter, ready to go, and in the next, a blinding white glare surrounded me, and as I opened my eyes, I found myself on the prehistoric African continent. I immediately felt the scorching heat of the sun burn into my skin, and in that moment, I cursed myself for not bringing sun protection. Such an obvious oversight, I thought. My pale British skin would be the death of me. The first thing that stood out to me was how humid it was compared to the present. If my calculations are correct, I should be at the site of Old Devi Gorge. But here, there is neither a gorge nor the arid shrubland it is known for. This place is ripe with vegetation and fauna. As I stepped out of the machine, I noticed it had broken, and I dragged it off into a nearby cave for protection until I could get it running again. I spent my first night inside that cave, sheltered from the elements and wildlife, and trying to repair my device. It was a futile effort, as I do not possess the parts necessary for such a repair. Another fatal oversight. My first 4 nights were relatively normal, or as normal as you would expect them to be 2 million years in the past. On my second day, I cautiously ventured outside the shelter, and it didn't take me long to make contact with the locals. Presumably, they are Homo habilis, but it is hard to tell. I am a physicist, not an anthropologist. Seeing them in the flesh is a surreal experience. To think I am the first human to lay eyes on another living human species in 40,000 years is extraordinary. I guess this writing also technically makes for the earliest writing in human history, which is also neat. The other humans first greeted me with a sort of reserved curiosity. They carried in their hands various stone tools and looked bizarre, though to them I probably looked equally strange. If they had the cognitive abilities to form thoughts about religion, I must have resembled a god to them. They let me observe them from a distance and never posed any problems. If anything, they wanted nothing to do with me. I find it ironic how these people live in dwellings constructed between trees and shrubbery out in the open, while it is myself who is living in a cave like some troglodyte. On the 5th night, things got strange. Just as the sun was setting, I was heading back to my cave when I heard my name called out, almost like a faint whisper coming from the tree line a short distance away. That voice, raspy and out of breath, I'd never heard anything like it before. I am positive it was not made by any of the local hominins. I briefly decided to investigate, but when I heard rapid approaching commotion in the bush, I took off. In my terror, I heard the loud snapping of twigs behind me. I ran all the way back to the cave and sealed the medium-sized opening with a makeshift door made out of wood and some rocks. I leaned in and listened intently after any noise and heard the rustling of some bushes not too far away, accompanied by some kind of raspy vocalization. Nothing else happened that night. The following morning, I saw outside my shelter concentric circles drawn in the sand, but no accompanying footprints. Later that day, I was led into the village of the hominins. There I traded my phone for some stone tools. I had no use for it anymore. The humans seemed perplexed by it, but were equally enchanted by its reflective surfaces. They allowed me to take some fruits and berries, but would not let me near the game meat, shouting whenever I did so. Despite that, I still can't believe the hospitality they showed me. As the sun was setting, I left the forested shelter of my ancestors and began walking back to the cave. The volume of trees gradually subsided, and I found myself in an open and lush, savanna-like environment, but with thick shrubs on either side of the path. Then suddenly, something struck the ground in front of me, nearly hitting me. It was my phone. Confused, I thought the humans had grown tired of it and followed me back in anger. But then, something intriguing happened. Another phone struck the ground right next to the first one, clearly of the same make, and clearly identical to the one I had traded hours earlier. But that was impossible, as I had only brought one. Then another flew out from a nearby bush, hitting me in the arm. I looked up, scanning the bushes, but I saw nothing. I slowly backed up, and when I did so, the bushes rustled for a moment, and then stopped. I took another step backward, and the rustling repeated, and once again stopped. It was mimicking me. When I finally made that realization, I once more ran back to the cave at full sprint, quickly sealing the entrance behind me. As I turned on my headlamp, which I still had batteries for, I noticed something drawn on the sandy floor of the cave. It was another concentric circle, identical to the one outside this morning. I was too horrified to sleep, but eventually, my tiredness gave in, and I drifted off. I spent the next day teaching myself how to hunt, though I had some food rations from modern times back in the cave. Eventually, I would need to learn how to hunt if I were to survive out here, I figured. I had tried in the morning to hunt some lizards and birds with the stone weaponry I acquired the day prior, but with little success. I couldn't survive on berries and fruits alone, so I decided that the only way to get some protein around these parts would be to accompany a hunting party. I waited outside the village until the men left for their daily hunt, but as I approached them, they angrily detested my presence, denying my company. They waved their arms at me, ushering me to keep a distance, so for the rest of the day, I did exactly that. I lived in their shadow, observing but never interrupting their hunt. The following hours were spent watching the H. habilis hunt some local megafauna. Among them was an animal that is now extinct, therefore I do not know its name, but it resembled some kind of elephant. As I from a distance watched my early ancestors secure the kill and slice off chunks of meat with their stone scrapers, the most eerie thing occurred. About 9 of the humans stood gathered around the elephantine creature, when suddenly, something pale sprinted out from the nearby tree line. It was bipedal and double the height of the other men. The thing was certainly humanoid in shape, but this was definitely no primitive hominin. Its marble white flesh glistened in the sun as it ran full force towards the dead animal. The hunters quickly noticed it and scattered, some even leaving behind their stone tools. The figure ran up to the elephant and began eating, tearing the animal's flesh off with its hands. It gorged itself on the meat and suddenly stopped. I laid low in the bush about 100 meters away, eagerly watching in terrified amazement. It was hard to make out details at such a distance, but what I saw next, I am certain of. The thing slowly reared its head and looked directly at my direction. I'm not sure if it saw me or not, but I could feel its piercing gaze. The wall of text ended, and Edward and I had to round a slight corner in the room to get to the next section. It was also during this time that he spoke out for the first time. "Do you think this could be real?" he asked gently, almost concerned. "I mean, you saw the strata. There couldn't possibly have been anyone else here for millions of years." "I don't know, Eddie. Let's just keep reading and find out," I answered nonchalantly back, pretending like this didn't deeply unsettle me too. Truth is, I was beginning to get highly unnerved. My initial scientific awe had now shifted into an uncertain angst. The inscriptions continued. "I haven't seen sunlight since the 10th day. That's when I see them clearly. I had spent that day harvesting fruits and berries alongside the local hominin population. They let me follow them back into their village, where we quite literally enjoyed the fruits of our labor. Again, this level of hospitality was wholly unexpected for such a primordial species of human. All was going well, but it was beginning to get dark, and I was frantically ushered out of their encampments. I thought this weird, but decided to shrug it off as a cultural thing, if they even had such a concept. Heading back to my cave, the sun was setting on the horizon, and just as I was nearing the mouth of the cave, a looming shadow stretched across the ground in front of me, blocking out the last rays of light from the evening sun. Someone or something was standing high above the rocky outcrop the cave was situated beneath, casting an oppressive shadow. I looked up and saw the dark silhouette of a person. With the bright backdrop of the sunset, it was hard to make out any features, but I could tell that whatever was standing there was not one of the local hominins. When it understood that I had seen it, it began climbing down, scurrying on all fours across the rocky surfaces. Frightened, I hurried inside the cave and quickly grabbed the makeshift door and pushed it into the opening to block it. The door was like a plug, fashioned out of a large boulder and some wooden sticks and thatch. But before I had sealed the entrance completely, I looked out of the opening one last time. And that's when I laid my eyes clearly on them. There were 4 of them, walking slowly towards the opening from about 10 meters away, now fully upright. The sheer terror I felt at that moment is indescribable. They were all ghastly pale, their flesh smooth and spotless. They stood at probably 2 meters tall, and they had neither any body hair nor any reproductive organs or nipples. The word that comes to mind when describing them is embryonic. They were featureless in all aspects except the most harrowing. They, all of them, had my face. They looked like me, hairless, sure, but still nearly identical. The foremost of them opened its mouth and stretched out its hand, and said in perfect English, "You don't belong here." That was the last I saw of them, before sealing the cave completely. I quickly reinforced the door plug with any rocks and boulders I could find in the cave, and so far it has been effective. I have now been here for God knows how long. I still have enough supplies to last me several days, and enough batteries to continually power my headlamp for at least another day or 2. But I hear them. They are outside. They haven't left me ever since that frightful evening. Sometimes they take breaks, but never long enough for me to deem it safe to leave this place. For all I know, it might be a trick to lure me out. It's only a matter of time before they break in. Their cries echo throughout the cavernous walls. This writing will be my only lasting legacy. Therefore, I hope I have provided sufficient detail to be of some use in some way or another. This is my punishment. These devils, I know what they are. They are my lack of hubris manifest. I foolishly thought the laws of time and space were mine to conquer. However, fate would not allow it. Perhaps rightfully so. Oh, how terribly sorry I am. Patricia, I'm truly sorry. I should have listened. End of text. Or well, not quite. The inscriptions continued beyond this, but they were of a different character. I won't reproduce the contents of the last wall, but I can tell you what it consisted of. The blueprints for Bill's machine and a plea to be saved. The power of time was now figuratively in the palm of my hand. I'm not saying I fully believe everything that was written, but on the off chance there may be some truth to it, I choose to keep this DIY recipe a secret. I walked over to the golden ring that adorned the cave floor and picked it up. It too was inscribed with the initials B and P. I pocketed it and asked Edward, "Where is his skeleton then?" "What do you mean?" he replied. "His bones. If he withered away in this cave, they should have been here." "There are some bones in here, over there as well," he said and pointed across the cave. "I know, I saw them. But they don't make for a complete skeleton, do they?" I replied. "I suppose not," Edward acquiesced, aware of the implications. "This place is giving me the creeps," I spoke, suddenly getting an intense surge of paranoia. "What do you say we head back soon?" I whipped out my phone camera and took several pictures of the inscribed walls and artifacts within the cave. Both Eddie and I agreed it was time to head back to assess the situation and where we would go from here. We also agreed not to tell the rest of the excavation crew for the time being. I am sitting inside my tent now, an hour till midnight, and recording this entry. In the time that passed since leaving the cave and now, I have meticulously examined the photos I took. But I dare not step inside that cave again. Something inside me desperately wants to seal it again, and I regret not doing so, as I think we may have committed a grave mistake. About an hour ago, our field assistant, Lila, came to me in my tent, voicing her concern about something. When she described what had gotten her worried, my blood ran cold. She had asked about why there were concentric circles drawn in the sand all around our encampment. When I heard this, I rushed outside with my flashlight in hand, and I saw them with my own eyes. The whole crew was gathered outside, gawking at the strange markings. In the small crowd of anthropologists and excavators, I locked eyes with Edward, and without speaking a word, I knew what was on his mind. I fear we may have unknowingly unleashed something ancient. But how? There were no passages leading further into a deeper cave system that I could see. It was an enclosed chamber, albeit very dark and with many corners. Could it mean that whatever it is we have unleashed was inside the room with us this entire time? I shudder at the thought. I think it's best I finish up this entry now. There has been an increase in whispers and unrest in the camp this past hour, so I better tend to it and try to get this situation under control. Any tips or advice to make this make sense is appreciated. If what we discovered today really is true, which I am now more inclined to believe, then our common ancestors weren't alone all those millions of years ago. And it might possibly turn out that we aren't either.